Welcome to the Museum Roadshow. I'm Roger Engstrom. Today we're going to be talking about the Nunn family, which came to Becker County in the early 1880s.
I'm a fifth-generation descendant of William and Mary Nunn. William and Mary were tenant farmers in Suffolk County, England. They were married in 1825 and good tenant farmers, so having a great life there. The story of how they got to North America is quite unusual. In 1836, so the story goes, their oldest son Jesse was tending the landlord's sheep. And one day, the landlord came upon Jesse and felt that he was being neglectful of his duties. And in punishment, or as a reminder not to do that anymore, he took his penknife and tacked through 9-year-old Jesse's ear, tacked him to a tree so that he would remember. Well, when my great-great-grandpa, William, came upon his 9-year-old boy tacked to the tree with a penknife, he was outraged. And he went out in search of the landlord, beat him up so badly, in fact, that they were forced to flee, the whole family, that very night. Well, they went to Liverpool, got on a ship, took 30 days to get across over, landed finally in Dundas, Ontario. They had 4 kids. The youngest was William Jr. at 20 weeks. Well, it took a while for them to get established, but in 1854, 100 years before I was born, great-great-grandpa William and Mary proved up on their homestead there in Dundas, Ontario. They would have 15 children, 11 boys, 4 girls, and many of them just stayed in Canada. But there were 3 who decided that they wanted to emigrate then to America. And in about 1881-82, Alfred, William Jr., and John, those 3 brothers came to the Detroit Lakes, Detroit at the time, the Becker County area. They settled, they filed on land out by Shoreham and Mud Lake and all the way over to Ponsford. If you are walking down the street in Detroit Lakes at the Washington Square Mall, if you look up, you'll notice on the top of the Washington Square Mall a big block, big stone, N-U-N-N, and that is because my great-uncle, or my granduncle, G.C., George Curtis Nunn, had his harness shop there in the basement of where the Washington Square Mall is now. And directly across the street is Jesse Sylvester, who is the namesake of that little boy long ago in England that got pinned to the tree. Jesse Sylvester was the undertaker, and if you look up up on top of the building, you'll see the building that he did, where he was the undertaker and had a furniture store there.
Jesse, who's referred to as J.S. Nunn, was an undertaker and furniture store operator who came to Detroit, Minnesota in 1879 when his father, William Jr., was in the undertaking business and one of the first to take out a license as an embalmer, and he homesteaded near Lake Sally. His son Jesse returned to Canada and married a Margaret Creamer in 1882. They returned to Detroit in 1905, where they established a furniture store and a funeral parlor. At one time, Jesse's business was housed in the old Methodist Church building on Washington Avenue, but it was destroyed in the Great Fire of 1914. In 1915, the Nunn Dexter building was built, and Jesse moved his furniture store and funeral parlor in there until he retired in about the 1920s and sold the business to Mr. England and Holstrom. This later became England's Furniture until about 1950s. Today it's part of Price's Fine Jewelry and Barbara's Hair and Body Care. The upstairs is being used as living quarters. Jesse passed away in 1948 at his home in California. His 93-year-old granddaughter talked to us last summer about her memories of Jesse and his wife, Margaret Nunn.
Grandpa had, Percy Nunn was his first child, and I'm his first grandchild. So Percy Nunn was a teacher, and she married my dad, and they were in St. Paul. But I came back here, and I was born in Grandpa's house. don't ask me any other questions about that event. But I was in the house the other day. It's, I hope, correct, 907 Summit. And it's a cute little white house, and the windows are so tiny. At least that makes it look a little bit older. But the fact that I was the first grandchild of Jesse Nunn, and I don't know whether it's correct or not, because his father died about a month after I was born. But I knew Hannah in that picture. If you see, there's William and Hannah. And Hannah came to St. Paul when Grandpa Jesse decided to move to California in 1920. And I think there's a big article in your museum, the Becker County, of his trip, which took 6 weeks, and they used the geography book for a map. And he took his own mother, Hannah, and his wife. But they stopped in St. Paul on the way out of Minnesota, which was a big chore, because we lived in St. Paul, and I came to Detroit to do things and be a kid in the water here. But the trip that they were making, they stopped so often with people they knew. They must have kept in touch with a lot of people who had left Minnesota, because his account, which is in your museum, is very accurate about he wrote it about that trip and all the other people he saw en route. And they stopped in schoolyards because there'd be water, and then stopped near lakes because then there was a bath. I don't know how they fed themselves, but that doesn't come across in his story. But when they came to St. Paul, I remember a great-grandmother, Hannah. We lived in St. Paul on Snelling, and we had a big backyard because my mom and dad they grew fruit trees and fruit bushes and corn and vegetables, even though they were right in the city. So I remember sitting on the steps there, in the back steps, having picked up the tomatoes. So we were sitting there eating tomatoes, and I can recall her reaching in her pocket and pulling out a salt shaker. So we had salt on our tomatoes as we were sitting there in the sun. And that's all I remember about that government, because that was 1920, and I was born in 1917.
Stay tuned next week for more on the Nunn family here on the Museum Roadshow.